You know what just happened? Silence. You and I just sat in silence. And maybe there was some awkward moment, or maybe you thought that your screen froze, or what in the world is going on. But the truth is, this is a full episode about silence. And here's something I've never told you. As a singer, I have stood on stages and performed and spent years, literally years, doing improv comedy where silence is basically considered a cardinal sin. But the reality, when you're in the work, silence is extraordinarily powerful. It brings focus. It brings a possibility for failure or creativity. Yet, every episode that I do here, I do in complete silence. But the deeper our thinking is, the more important the work is to ourselves. And the more absolutely essential I feel silence becomes for me. But it took me a long time to understand why. But here's what I do know, and what the science is starting to confirm about silence. That silence isn't the absence of something. Silence is actually where the healing and creativity happens. So I'm MC, I'm with Healthy by George, and I come here each week to talk about all things aging, longevity. And truthfully, I find this so exciting for myself, and I hope you do too. So let me ask you something. When was the last time that you sat in genuine silence? Not meditating, not sleeping, not doing anything else or listening to anything, the radio, music, or podcasts. Real, chosen, sustained quiet. For most of us, and I include myself in this, the honest answer is I would only remember it because I'm doing episodes in silence. And that's not an accident. But most of the time, we live in a world that is hugely noisy. It's aggressively engineered to fill every single moment with sound, with stimulation, with background noise, with any kind of notification on your phone, the dinging, the binging. While we cook, while we exercise, while we walk, we got the news. I'm addicted to Crime Junkie. I don't know about you. The minute we get up in the morning, we're putting on the sound. First time that we open our eyes. So here's the thing that really got me when I started digging into the research. The noise isn't just annoying, the constant sound that we surround ourselves. It's actually making us sick. When your body is exposed to chronic sound and noise and just constant sound for background or for anything, and we're not talking about just jackhammers here or things that are irritating, but we're talking about just the background of noise, traffic, the television, some buzzing fan, or something that's going on that you keep hearing. This constant noise, your brain gets activated on what's called the HPA axis. And that's your hypothalamic pituitary. It's a hypothalamic pituitary adrenaline system. It triggers the release of cortisol, your stress hormone, and puts our body into a low-grade, ongoing fight or flight state. The sound that we're chronically exposed to is constantly triggering our brain, and we're producing cortisol, our stress hormone. And over time, that constant chronic cortisol activation leads to persistent inflammation into our body, elevated blood pressure, damaged blood vessel walls, and an increased risk of heart disease and stroke. Not only does this happen, we know through the World Health Organization that these noises in our environment are stressors for our human health. And they are stressors second only to air pollution. Second only to air pollution is the chronic noise. We are choosing this every single day, and I'm just as guilty. I get up, I'm putting on the news. I get up, I'm putting on a podcast, or I'm listening to the this or the that every day. I reach for my phone, or I turn on the television or an iPad, or I put in the earbuds, and I literally start sound constantly. And when we choose silence, we're horribly uncomfortable, and that it literally makes us want to avoid it all the time. So why is that? What are we so afraid of? I think we're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of what we might hear when the noise stops or what we might think. Now, here is where I love science, because science sometimes stumbles into these things by accident. The research on science, it wasn't supposed to happen. Scientists were studying the effects of music and noise on the brain. And silence was just the control component. It wasn't being studied. It was the placeholder between the interesting parts of the experiment. It was the supposedly nothing compared to the something. And then the physician, Luciano Bernard, noticed something extraordinary in 2006. The 2-minute pauses of silence between the music and noise, the parts they weren't studying, were producing the most powerful effects in their patients for this experiment. More relaxing than the music, more restorative than the longer silences before the experiment began. And that was humongous, because then silence wasn't the nothing, it was the control. It was actually the treatment. And since then, research has only gotten more expansive to understand what we now know that silence does for our body and our brain. The number one thing that silence does for us is it lowers our cortisol. Just 2 minutes of silence has been shown in research to produce greater cardiovascular relaxation or relaxation. That listening to soothing music is more powerful than listening to soothing music. Your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, your nervous system shifts from the fight or flight to the rest and repair. Just 2 minutes. But I think so many of us avoid those 2 minutes of silence. The other thing that silence does is it shifts our brain waves. When you sit in silence, your brain moves from what we call beta waves, the fast, high alert, anxious, on guard mental states, down into something that's alpha and theta waves, closer to those restorative waves we see when we do sleep. They're the state that's welcoming in calmness, creativity, focus, deep insight. It's the state artists and writers and musicians describe as being in flow or in the zone. And silence gets you there. Finally, in a study in 2013, they found that 2 hours of silence stimulated the growth of new cells in our hippocampus. We actually generated new neurons in the hippocampus with 2 hours of silence. And this is the region of the brain responsible for memory and emotions. Silence gave us that. So I need you to really hear what this means for us as human beings. We spend an enormous amount of time worrying about our memory. We worry about how we're going to grow older and have the capability of focusing and our thought is going to be preserved. But genuinely, something that costs you absolutely nothing is silence. And it may be literally helping your brain grow new cells more than any app or any crossword puzzle or learning any new function. This is the very thing that we run from each day, and yet it has the most protective component for our aging brains. And there's still even more. Clinical trials with older adults specifically found that structure, regular silence improved memory, it lowered our anxiety, and it actually slowed cognitive impairment. Not a drug, not an action, not an intervention, but silence, quiet, stillness. Boredom is good for us. I know that sounds silly, but our whole culture is built on productivity and making sure that we're squeezing the most out of every second that we're awake and alive, and that being bored is the enemy of that. And we have to defeat that boredom and we have to fill it up so we can escape any kind of boredom. And there are entire episodes on social media and gaming whose sole purpose is to make sure you are never, ever bored. But here's what the neuroscience says. When your brain is bored, when it isn't chasing a notification or processing any kind of information, and you're just present, suddenly your brain wakes up. It activates. It's what we call in the research the default mode network. And despite the slightly boring name, this network is anything but a default. It's where your brain makes connections between things maybe that you've experienced, or it makes connections between your emotions, or it makes creative connections that you haven't thought of before. It's where you suddenly figure out a problem that you've been trying to understand. A study found that participants who completed a boring task, literally copying numbers from a phone book, generated significantly more creative ideas in a subsequent brainstorming session than they had done before they did this boring task. Now that's fascinating to me, that we can do something that's boring and yet it's a creative incubator for us. I think that's why Einstein would go on walks, because it's on the walks where he's just being mundane, walking, that suddenly something would pop into his brain about something he was thinking on a huger mathematical plane. And this is where researchers call mind wandering. There's that as well. The kind of unfocused drifting, you may be staring at the ceiling or looking at a bug or a flower, and it's really vague and you feel kind of guilty that you're not doing anything. That state, your brain is doing something actually. And it's most important. It's probably waking up some connections, progress. Maybe it's processing some unresolved grief, or you're connecting to some sudden acknowledgement of joy, or you connect to a deeper sense of hope or purpose in your life. You're suddenly finding solutions that your conscious brain has been struggling with and getting nowhere. I know you've had that experience and that you've been stuck on something, and then all of a sudden doing something like taking a shower, suddenly they've got a solution to their problem. Or again, you're doing something like washing your dishes or you're folding the clothes and suddenly something pops into your brain and it's like they're an answer you've been looking for. That wasn't magic. That was your default mode network doing what it does when you finally give it space. Now, I want to make an important distinction here because not all boredom is equal. The kind of boredom that heals you is chosen boredom. It's voluntary, it's transient, it's free roaming, it's kind of mental idleness. It's the difference between choosing to sit on your porch without your phone for 20 minutes and being stuck in a meeting that has gone on for 3 hours. And basically, one is medicine and the other is torture. Even brief doses of this kind of boredom makes a difference. Studies have shown that as little as 5 to 15 minutes of undistracted, quiet time can trigger our mind wandering and creative insight that restores your brain's energy. And you don't have to go on a 10-day silent retreat. You just have to put your phone down, turn off the computer, turn off the television, the radio, anything. So if silence is this good for us, physiologically, neurologically, emotionally, why are we relentlessly, desperately avoiding it? Here's what I think is really going on. And I say this as someone who has felt to look at this honestly in myself. Silence forces us to be present with who we are, present for all of who we are. And for a lot of us, I think those of us who have lived long enough to have some complicated chapters behind us or dealing with a loss or trauma, being alone with our own minds can feel genuinely upsetting and threatening. There's sometimes grief or regretfulness or loneliness, or you get in touch with uncertainty about the next steps in your life. And those big questions show up, and those don't have answers really. And our phones, they're so good, but they're also a curse. Our phones are such an extraordinarily effective at making sure we never have to sit without any of that. We can distract ourselves and do all the doom scrolling we want. Every time we reach for the phone, the moment we had an opportunity to be silent or bored, that twinge of what would welcome in of discomfort goes away because we start to get a little hit of dopamine instead of the type of relief that boredom and silence can give you. That pattern is really deadly. And we repeat it on and on. And some people go well into the night and stay up 1 and 2 a.m. It's a habit, it's an addiction for some. And some research argues with the same neurological signatures as substance use disorders. So, how much are you using your phone? One study found that we spend an average of 4 seconds on each website before moving on. 4 seconds. And we can barely stand to sit in 5 seconds of silence. Yep, I see you and I see myself. Because here's what I want you to consider. The things you're trying to avoid by staying busy and connected, they don't go away when you just scroll. They just go underground. They accumulate. They come out in a different expressive as anxiety or instability or low-grade depression or fatigue and exhaustion, or sometimes there's not enough Netflix or YouTube videos in the world to calm all that down. And silence isn't what we should be afraid of. Silence is where we finally get to hear ourselves. And I want to tell you what silence actually feels like when you stop fighting it. When I'm writing, I'm really writing, and the silence is complete. Something extraordinary happens. The internal noise starts to quiet too. The to-do list goes away. Those worries that I have, they soften. And what's left is clarity. And I think the exact word is I feel more connected to who I am, and I can release the burdens that are they real? Not really. There's something that either happened in the past or it hasn't happened. So I can let it go. One researcher who facilitates silent retreats describes it this way. In silence, we can slow down. We can take time to observe the things around us and just be. This helps us pay attention and be present to the moment, whatever it is we happen to be doing. And that phrase, just be, I know it can sound like a wellness cliche or some kind of woo, but I think what it actually means is something quite profound for those of us at this stage of life as we are getting older. We have spent decades doing. We've spent decades working, raising children, building careers and caregiving and achieving. And now we're in the last chapter of our life where some of those structures are changing or they're falling away. Kids are grown, careers are becoming something different. We're shifting down, we're evolving. And silence is actually one of the most powerful tools we have for figuring out who we are in this new chapter, especially what we want and what still matters and what we're ready to let go of. You can't hear any of that if there's so much noise. I want to also say something about boredom and aging specifically, because I think this matters. Research shows that a regular quiet practice, as little as 2 hours of accumulated silence across the day, spaced in small pockets, can show age-related cognitive decline improve. It improves your memory. It improves your anxiety. And it builds an emotional resilience that lasts for weeks. That's just 2 hours over the day. That's nothing. So it sounds like a lot initially, and you realize that 10 minutes here or 15 minutes there, or a cup of coffee in the morning, or walk in the evening without earbuds, or cooking without noise, all of those count. And that is really the little bit that you need to do. Maybe sitting in the car before you get out to go to the grocery store, or sitting in the car before you reach for the phone and head into the house. Silence doesn't have to be a retreat, and it doesn't require meditation or a cushion or a yoga mat or any kind of special tool. It just requires the willingness to stop and be with yourself. So I invite you this week, find a moment, just one, where you would normally fill the silence with something. Maybe it's your morning coffee or the commute or your exercise or your walk or 10 minutes before bed. And just have silence. Don't reach for your noisemaker. Sit there, be still. Yeah, it may feel a little weird and awkward at first. Let your mind wander. Let yourself be slightly, voluntarily, productively bored. And just notice what comes up. Maybe nothing, but you might get surprised, but you've been waiting to kind of hear from yourself. And I believe the science backs me up on this, that one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves as we age is the gift of our own presence. We're not performing, we're not achieving, we're not optimizing, we're just being fully here and listening to ourselves. There's a quote I love from the spiritual leader Ram Dass. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. I spent a lot of years being loud and making things happen and filling up my space. But now I understand that silence was never empty. It was just waiting for me. And maybe it's waiting for you. So I'm Dr. Mary Catherine George, and this is Healthy by George. I come here each week to help us talk about silence and learning and together and aging can make us healthier and better so that we're the best version of who we are into our 80s and 90s. And if this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it or tell me about your experience of having a little silence or boredom. Please subscribe. Please share. I'd love to see you here each week. And one thing we know is true. We have this one precious life. Let's live it to the fullest. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
So thank you so much for joining me at Healthy by George. I hope you found the information inspiring and that it encourages you on your wellness journey. Because remember, your body, your well-being are a most precious gift, and every tiny action taken daily can make a huge difference. I hope the information here is educational purposes and is not meant to replace your medical care. See your doctor and talk about what works for you. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continuing creating content that inspires and empowers you to live your best life. Goodbye for now, and join me again at the next Healthy by George.